Hello, my name is Ruby. I am a professional tarot reader, psychic, archetypal astrologer, and I am also a priestess. And that's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to be talking about the roles and duties of a priestess, the office of a priestess, and how to know if this is your path, this is your calling, and some ways to begin walking that path of priestesshood. So if you're interested in content like this, please like and subscribe. It gives me a good idea of what you want to see and hear from me. And I guess a disclaimer at the beginning, all of this information is information that has been channeled and given to me, but I feel very confident in sharing this information as truth, because it is very strongly come through as truth. So as always, take what resonates with you, but please heed the message and take it seriously. So a priestess, first and foremost, is a bridge and an intermediary between the divine and the divine realms and the earthly and mundane realms. And to be a priestess is to be in a role of service and devotion. And what's really come through for me is that there are three main roles and duties of a priestess, three mantles that the priestess carries. And those are invocation, transmission, and devotion and service, which really they all play into each other. And so while these three categories have distinct qualities, a lot of times they are flowing together and merging together. So I do have some notes I'll be referring to just to keep me on course. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm looking at. And so first I want to talk about invocation. So what invocation is invocation is calling on the higher realms and engaging in specific practices to bring those energies into the space. And so there's some specific forms of invocation. There is offerings and prayers. So if you are a priestess and you have a home altar, part of your responsibility is to be offering and charging that altar with prayers, with blessings, with physical offerings to the goddess, incense, fruit, sacred smoke. There's so many specific types of offerings, and what your offering entails is going to be specific to the energies and the deities you work with. So I primarily work with Mary Magdalene and Isis. I am a priestess of that lineage. However, this path really started for me working with the Hindu pantheon. And so I'm still very connected to the goddesses of the Hindu tradition, and I leave offerings and work with them as well. I am also connected to Mother Mary and Yeshua as part of my path as a priestess of Magdalene, and I am also very connected. Excuse me. I am very connected to Hecate as well. So those are the main energies that I am constantly calling in, working with, and leaving offerings for, invoking. But the deities that you call in will be specific to you, and you will come to know how they prefer to be invoked. So some deities like Mother Mary, they don't really care for a lot of physical offerings. What they're really looking for is prayer. Other deities, like I find Hecate really likes physical offerings. She is stern and strict in a compassionate, beautiful way, but I find that leaving an offering for her at least weekly really keeps the channel open and the connection strong. And if I neglect that practice, my connection to that specific energy starts to weaken. So that is the first form of invocation. The second would be incantation, chanting, and devotional worship. So this is a practice I especially use within the Hindu pantheon, just because there is such a well-worn practice within that lineage around mantra, chanting, and devotional work. However, I use these practices now with all of the deities that I work with. So I use chanting, music, mantra as one of the primary ways that I invoke and call in this sacred energy. And I find that specifically with the practice of chanting and mantra, it is really a bridge between invocation and transmission. Because when you are chanting to a deity, you aren't just offering worship, there is a part of it. There is a worship and devotion component to chanting and mantra work. However, what you are also doing when you chant is you are calling the energy of that deity or that being into your body temple and into your vessel. And this is something that is taught within the practice of bhakti in India, is that when you are chanting mantra, like let's say we're chanting a mantra to Kali, we aren't just doing standby worship like they do in like mainstream Christian religion. We aren't just praising Kali, that the mantras in Sanskrit are the actual energy of Kali. And we are bringing that energy into our space and into our vessel through the practice of chanting. And so if you are a priestess, I think that this is just a part of the path, or at least it very strongly is for me. And if you are connected to the path of the priestess and you already don't have a practice around mantra and chanting, I highly suggest you start one. Okay, so the third form of invocation, and this is another form of invocation that really melds into transmission. That is ritual and ceremony. So part of the mantle of the priestess is to hold sacred ritual and sacred ceremony. And this is something that we may do for ourselves as a way to engage and commune with this path and these energies that we work with. And this also may be a mantle that we take out into the community. So often as priestesses, eventually we receive a call to take this work and share it with others, to hold ceremonial space for a community. And when we hold this space in this way, we become the vessel in which the divine moves throughout the space. So a part of that ritual and ceremony is invocation. The act of ritual and ceremony itself is an invocation. And then through the ritual and ceremony space being cast and held, transmission comes through. And so as you can see, these three categories of the office of the priestess, they aren't so separate. All of them really meld and blend together. And while there are specific practices that I associate strongly with one of these categories, each of these practices contain all of them. So I hope that that's clear. I'm happy to talk more about that if there's any area of what I'm saying that you would like further clarity on. Okay, so the last form of invocation is sacred embodiment and adornment. If you are working with the divine feminine, very likely she will ask that you present yourself in some way that honors her. So the way I dress, the way I carry myself, the way I move in the world is an extension of the goddess. And so every time I am putting on my makeup, I am getting dressed, I am invoking the energy of the goddess. And anytime I engage in embodied practices that honor my own feminine being, I am invoking the goddess into my vessel. So now moving on to the office of transmission. So let's see, what do I have here for transmission? So one of them is healing and anointing. Let's go back. Okay, I found my place. So healing and anointing is a part of the transmission. I'm going to come back to that. The first I want to talk about is channeling and divination, because I do feel like these come in tiers. So the first form of transmission I'm going to talk about is channeling and divination. So let me back up. So what is transmission? So with invocation, we are filling ourselves with the energy of the goddess. We are bringing the goddess into our space. And now with transmission, we have become the goddess, and we are now going to bring that energy out. So that is transmission. And the first form of transmission we're going to talk about is channeling and divination. So priestesses are often prophets. Not all tarot readers are channeling, not all tarot readers are priestesses, but very often a priestess will engage in some form of channeling and divination, because as a priestess, you become the oracle and the mouthpiece of the energy that you are serving and are devoted to. The second is healing and anointing. So as a priestess, what we will often do is we will offer the energy of the goddess to ourselves and others. And when we do that, there is transmission around healing and anointing and initiation that occurs. And this can be physical healing, or this can be offering a higher frequency or a higher state of being that impacts what it touches. So whether we are transmitting this for ourselves or we are offering it to another, the transmission that comes through, the energy of the goddess that comes through, is a higher frequency that when it is received, elevates the frequency of the person, of the individual that is receiving, resulting in healing, initiation, transformation, alchemical, and sometimes physical, emotional healing. And then something else that we could add to transmission is what I would deem a possession state. And that is when we have engaged in an invocation practice and we are so full of the goddess that we are the goddess and the goddess is us. And then anything that we touch or any space we enter carries the space of the goddess. And for us to be in this state, our channel needs to be very clear and our frequency needs to be very high. And so this type of possession state is not something you are going to achieve at the very beginning of your journey or path. And if you do, it won't be sustained for long periods of time. Once you have been on this path for a while and you have engaged in your own healing work, then you may be in this state for longer periods of time. And for me, sometimes I even slip into this state involuntary. And it's voluntary in the sense that I have offered myself as a vessel of the divine feminine. And so it's not non-consensual, it is consensual, but I have not consciously sat at my altar, engaged in invocation. What has happened is I have been in that energy so consistently that I can involuntarily enter into a possession state. And I think the word possession can have a negative connotation because of mainstream religion. We view that as like being possessed by the devil, but all that is becoming a vessel. So our consciousness has decreased. We have become a hollow bone. So the consciousness of the divine can enter. And the third aspect of the priestesshood is service and devotion. So, service and devotion is a holy dedication to the goddess. And I'm just going to read what I wrote here. I wrote, "We decrease so the goddess can increase." And I think it's really important for me to say that it is really important that you know this is a path for you before you start walking on it, because this is a path that requires a lot of commitment and dedication. And you can work with the goddess and you can work with the divine feminine in your spiritual practice without taking the mantle of the priestess on. But once you take on the mantle of the priestess, this is a full-time job. And this is something that is required that we bring our full commitment and dedication to. And that's why that this is a path that you have to be called into and you have to be chosen into. And I am not saying this to gatekeep. I am saying this because this is a path of sacred work, of sacred service. And if you are a priestess, you are held to a higher standard of integrity and behavior on the spiritual path, because you aren't just walking the path as a soul. You are saying, I want to be an embodiment and a mouthpiece of an aspect or aspects of the divine, of source consciousness, of God, of goddess. And if we are in an office where we are the mouthpiece of the divine, our channel has to be clear. We have to constantly be purifying. We have to constantly be checking ourselves, doing our healing work, doing our shadow work. We can't be engaging in behaviors and relationships that are not aligned long term. And when we do engage in those things, because we're not perfect and we're also human, and I do want to say there's also grace on this path, but if we are engaging in those practices, we feel that karma a lot faster as priestesses. And we are held to a higher standard because this is our calling and this is our path. So when I say make sure this is your path before you start owning this for yourself, and when I say make sure that this is your calling before you consecrate and initiate yourself and do some type of ceremony where you offer yourself up in this way, make sure you're ready. Make sure this is what you want. And if you're at a place where there's certain relationships or behaviors that you still want to hold on to, this is not a judgment thing, but just it might not be time for you. And if there's another calling or path that you're walking where this type of service is just not something that you have time or space for, you can still work with the divine feminine. You can still work with the goddess. But being a priestess is a very specific calling. And that's one of the reasons why I'm making this video, because I think in like modern new age social media culture, this word gets thrown around a lot. And I haven't seen a lot of definitions on what this role actually entails and what it means. So let's see what else I have here. Okay, so a priestess heals her community by first healing and purifying herself. And so like I said, when we begin to embark on this path, the first order of business really is a time of spiritual cleansing and purification. Now, we see a lot of the archetype of the priestess in the Vestal Virgins, in the asteroid and astrology of Vesta, in the goddess of Vesta and what her priestesses held. We also see it in the priestesses of Isis, but particularly with the Vestal Virgins, they were called virgins because they first belonged fully and wholly to themselves. Later, there was celibacy that was imposed upon them as patriarchy crept in. But initially, to be a Vestal Virgin, that meant that you belonged totally to yourself. So there was freedom and authority and sovereignty in being this Vestal priestess. But there was also an element of purity involved. If you were a virgin, then nobody else was creeping in and encroaching on your energy. Nobody else owned you. So I find often with those of us that have been called to the priestess path, before we commit to the path, we have a history of being in very abusive relationships. We have a history of giving our power away. And then when we come into this role, we take our power back. And this is a period of time in which we are joining with the goddess and working with the goddess to cleanse and purify ourselves, and I don't mean this in a shame-based or literal way, but so that we can become virgins whole into ourselves. And I believe one of the reasons why we have these experiences of disempowerment and even abuse in relationships is so that we can know what it is to not be in our power, really, and what it means to be in our power, really, and what it means to be controlled by the patriarchy and controlled by conditioning, and what it means to be in spiritual sovereignty, because this is medicine that we then offer to others. And it's really difficult to offer compassion on a medicine path if we ourselves have not walked the path to wholeness ourselves. So there's 2 more points I will make and embellish on before I close this video out, just because I see that we're now 20 minutes in and I want to be mindful and respect your time. The first is something that is a part of this service and devotion and also part of this transmission is doula work. So priestesses are doulas. And it's not that we are physical doulas, even though a priestess can be. And traditionally, many times throughout history, the role of the priestess, has involved being a doula and a midwife. I'm not a physical doula or a physical midwife, but in my professional work as a tarot reader, I am doulaing people through states of consciousness and through transitions. So oftentimes a client comes to me when they are on the brink of a shift in consciousness, a shift in soul evolution, or they are about to break through into a new way of being. And so what I do is I channel the divine energy and their own higher self to ferry them through that transition. So what does a doula do? A doula brings new things into being and then nurtures those things. So you will find often that when you are a priestess, you will be often called into this work of spiritual midwifery. And the last thing that I'll say is before you call yourself a priestess, you need to be initiated. You do need a form of initiation. And this is something that someone else can initiate you into, though I would caution you to use a lot of discernment before you do this, because I see, like I said, in the social media world, there's a lot of people calling themselves priestesses and come be initiated into my priestesshood for $2,222. But are they walking the path? Are they in integrity? Are they in your spiritual lineage? Are they walking their talk? So use a lot of discernment if you are choosing to engage in someone's training program. And I mean this with no shade or disrespect. I'm sure at some point I may be called to have my own training program, but at this stage, I am self-initiated and I feel that self-initiation is valid. And for those of us who have been walking this path for several lifetimes, self-initiation is the most appropriate path. And if you know what deities you work with, and if you know this is your path and your calling, and it's begun to come to you, because this is a calling that comes to you. This is a title and an office that you receive. When it comes to you, it's appropriate for you to initiate yourself when the time is right. Check in with your guides. As priestesses, we are our own spiritual authority. And so it is appropriate for you to initiate yourself, but be very, very clear you are being called, and be very, very clear that this is something that you want to dedicate your life to. Now, what is being a priestess involved in my day-to-day life? So I am in ceremony and ritual space almost every day. I maintain the altars in my home. I have commitments and contracts with the forms of the divine feminine that I serve. I am doing my own healing work constantly. I am doing my own shadow work constantly. I am uncomfortably faced with my own ego projections all the time. I don't get to indulge in behaviors or relationships long term that distract me from this path. And I don't think I've ever shared this publicly, but I say that I am a tarot reader and I'm an archetypal astrologer because that is a role that is pretty much accepted in our mainstream society. It's fringe, but especially the region that I live in, I'm in Colorado, people are pretty spiritually open, and I can say I'm a tarot reader, and people will come to me, and they know what that means, and they know what to expect. But when I am practicing divination, I'm really in my role as a priestess, as an oracle, as a prophetess. And the readings that I give are not mundane, get back with your boyfriend readings. They are very much soul path readings. They are healing readings. They are initiatory readings. I have initiated people on the path of mediumship and plant medicine, and I have initiated and voiced to people that they are priestesses, that they are psychics, that they are oracles. And I do that in my own role as a priestess. I'm doing it a little under the radar, but that's what I am doing. And so you will find that if you are initiated into this path of priestesshood, it is a full-time job, and whatever your vocation to make money is, you will bring this energy into that space. So I hope that that is helpful. I hope that that was clear. I am so happy to share more about this path, and I am feeling very called to share more about this path, which is edgy for me because it requires that I step out onto a ledge spiritually and come out of the closet in a way that before felt uncomfortable. I felt very comfortable talking about my work as a tarot reader, talking about my work as an astrologer, but first and foremost, I am a priestess. And that has been the role in the title that has been most difficult for me to publicly share about, because it's an acknowledgement that I see these beings, these goddesses, as their own independent higher forces. And I can't hide behind transpersonal psychology and self-help. And while there is a transpersonal element to this, and while I'm always so available to meet people where they're at, I have come to interact with these energies as very real beings that have desires and instruction. And that is something that has taken some courage for me to step into. But I'm here now, and I'm feeling that the goddess is going to require that I come out of the closet a lot more in this, and that I speak about this, because I am not the only one that is called to this. And there's not a lot of great information around about what being a priestess actually entails. So I hope that this was helpful, and as always, I am wishing you well, and I will see you in the next video.